Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and really pleased to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon, which is about participatory evaluation, and it's about using participatory evaluation approaches when trying to support more people to be physically active and to achieve social change through that. I'd just like to say I'm chairing the session today, and we're going to have speakers from Solent University, Dr. Kevin Harris and Dr. Cara Danks, who's from Sheffield Hallam University. We're going to try to achieve a bit of a discussion within this session, and so we really want you to participate by putting questions and any comments in the chat as we go along, and we're going to have an opportunity to answer those questions at two sections, once after Kevin's presentation and then subsequently after Cara's. We are all researchers who are working in this field of participatory evaluation and in physical activity, but we have lots to say on this matter, but we don't have all the answers, and so we really do want to open up that conversation and let people to give their own experiences, whether they're good or bad or indifferent. So please do stick around at the end of the presentations so that we can have a bit more of a discussion on these topics. Just to say that we are recording this session, so if you don't want to be on camera, do please mute and put yourself onto just a blank screen without your face showing. And so we will get cracking now. And as I say, we're just going to run through this agenda, but there will be opportunities for you to ask questions. Please do either put them in the chat to everybody, but if you prefer a private message to myself, and I'll ask those and chair that discussion session later. Okay, so just to say who I am, I'm Katie Shearn. I'm a researcher at Sheffield Hallam University, and together with some colleagues across Sheffield Hallam University, we've set up a systems change unit at the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre. And really, this is in order for us to pool expertise from a range of methodological backgrounds to help start to make sense and try to accumulate knowledge when we are thinking about how to change systems. Systems and systems thinking is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, alongside complexity. And what we mean by that is really just the ways in which parts of the world, policy, people, processes, practices all interact to bring about changes, and we want to try to understand how those things work. So before I hand over to Kev, what I'm going to do first of all is just introduce what we really even mean by participatory approaches for social change through physical activity. And I just want to draw your attention to a relatively new concept. It was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine last week by Lambert and colleagues, which is about physical activity security. And I hope that most people joining the presentation today are here because they believe that, broadly speaking, physical activity is a good thing, both for ourselves and for the planet. And this is a concept that's really now saying that this is something that is potentially a rights-based argument for governments and national policies to address. And it goes on to say in this this journal article, just as we've seen in the UK national guidance from Sport England, that to actually achieve physical activity security, we need a whole of government and a whole of society approach. And if that's the case, there's an awful lot of work to be done across the physical activity and leisure sector, as well as other sectors, transport, housing, education, crime, you name it. Everybody has a role to play in physical activity, and not least, there is a lot to be done with working and finding ways to empower local people and local communities to be part of this conversation, and to really to have an equal say in how we address this issue. So never before have we seen so much brought to light so much is through the COVID pandemic, that the structural inequalities influence inactivity just as they influence a myriad of other health and well-being outcomes. But what we do know is that being active can help to mitigate the negative outcomes of these structural inequalities. And what we're really also interested in is, by taking a whole of systems approach to physical activity, particularly in ways that actually include people participation, that change structures to focus on people's health and well-being as opposed to political or financial gains, actually that may also start to respond to those structural inequalities. But this is not an easy, simple, linear question to be tackled with simple interventions. We know that individual interventions don't work, are not effective, and we know that we must accept the complexity of the situation. And again, this is a bit of a buzzword, but what we mean by complexity is recognizing those ways in which different parts of society interact to bring about outcomes, or to bring about changes in the system which might not be predictable just from the interactions of those individual parts. And it's also a dynamic situation where those changes that then come about have an impact on the way that people work and the context in which they're sitting. And so this is a really a challenging thing to accumulate knowledge about, and our traditional research approaches, which might try to control context, might not be appropriate for this endeavour, and for us to, as researchers, to work with practitioners and to help them to make those difficult decisions in uncertain times. So this is really the concept of the webinar. What we're trying to make a case for is that we need an evaluation approach which assists innovators. And I say innovators but that can be anybody who's trying to affect social change. So that might be practitioners, that might be policymakers, that might be individuals, community champions, but an approach to evaluation and research which actually puts that knowledge into the hands of people who need to make changes and need to make decisions in this setting of uncertainty. We also believe that we need to build evaluative capacity. So how can we exchange our knowledge and our skills and ensure that people who are doing this work can to actually are able to make sense of the changes that are trying to affect, and that this work needs to be sensitive to context. And this really holds that no one intervention or no one combination of effects are going to be universally applied. We need to understand how to interact with the local context in order to make changes that will ultimately and hopefully lead to that physical activity security concept that has just been recently introduced by the World Health Organization. Okay, so that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Kev, and he's going to give us a really lovely example of how he's built evaluative capacity with sports and exercise coaches as part of a project called Generation Gains. So I'll hand over to Kevin now.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar. So just to very quickly introduce myself, my name is Kev Harris. I am a senior lecturer at Solent University on the South Coast. I'm also the lead of a research group called the Solent University Realist Research Group, bit of a tongue twister there, called SURGE. And I've been at Solent for around the last 15 years. Before working at Solent, I used to work in local authority sport development a long time ago. And then I also managed a project, which some of you might remember, called Positive Futures, which was a Home Office funded project around crime prevention, community cohesion, as well, before I moved to Solent. So I kind of come from this presentation with a very much a sensitive awareness of what it's like to be a practitioner, but also what it's like to be an academic as well, working within this area of participatory or collaborative evaluation. So I call it collaborative evaluation, but to be fair, collaborative and participatory mean the same things in essence. And, you know, thank you, Katie, for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about the work I've done with the Saints Foundation. So just in terms of how this is going to work, you'll see that there's a number of people on this presentation. It is just me doing the presentation, but I wanted to acknowledge within the spirit of collaborative evaluation that it's not just me that was part of this project. Claire Russell from the University of Bath, who might be in the one of the participants today, I'm not sure if she is, but they're also Jack Dyer and Harvey Ingledow Coke were two practitioners working for the Saints Foundation. They were called apprentices, but I'll call them practitioners, were a massive part of this project as well. So this is a project that represents our work, not just my work. So Katie's going to be looking after the slides for me. That's an inadvertent way of her saying, Kev, hurry up if I'm not going to fit the time scale. So thanks, Katie. If you can go to the next slide, that would be great. So the aims of my session, or the aims of the presentation today, is to first and foremost introduce what collaborative evaluation and action means, but particularly from my perspective. I'm keen to highlight some of the issues that are out there with collaborative evaluation, because lots of people, lots of academics, or there's been lots of research and publications that have claimed to have used participatory or collaborative evaluation, but it's not been entirely clear how that's worked. So I think participatory evaluation is used a lot, but it's not always mobilized within the right framework. So I'm going to talk a little bit around the type of framework that I use. I'm going to reflect in particular on my own experiences of mobilizing it within certain environments. And the particular experience that I'm going to reflect on today is a Generation Gains example at the Saints Foundation, which was part of a 3-year funded evaluation from Zurich Community Trust. And tried just to create some discussion towards the end, you know, around if anyone's got any questions or if anyone's got any reflections. That's what this session is about, really. And if there's any messages that I would like people to kind of take home from this presentation, is that it's this idea that collaborative evaluation can help practitioners understand more about their program. So it can create learning. It can actually encourage people to understand more about what's going on. It can help practitioners become better evaluators. It can help them to be more aware of what evaluation really means. And it can help practitioners to actually develop and create stronger links through my experience with program participants. So it's a nice mechanism, if you want to call it that, to be able to engage people. And I'm extremely passionate about evidence-based training or monitoring and evaluation being a key part of a practitioner's continual professional development. So that in a nutshell is what I'm going to be talking about over the next 18 or so minutes, if I can stick to time. So Katie, next slide. So personal reflections from me and my experiences as being a practitioner and as being an academic over the last 15 or so years is that, in essence, the first point that I would say is that there are major gaps, in my opinion, and also there is literature to support that opinion, between knowledge translation between academics and industry contexts. And by industry, I'm talking from government all the way down to the local level of delivery of sport and physical activity, sport for development, sport for social change. So you've got academics who produce reports, they do evaluations, they do PhDs. Some of those PhDs are there to be disseminated to industry. But a lot of the time, hence the images on the right-hand side, we are stuck within this world of these reports collecting dust. You know, we'll produce like a 30-page evaluation. We'll give it to the client who's paid us to do it because it's been tied up with funding or something along those lines. And the question is, to what extent is the learning from that evaluation or from that work really fostered? To what extent is it used? Now, I'm not saying that this is a generic statement that I'm saying this happens everywhere, because I know it doesn't, but in some cases it does, and it can. So from my PhD and from the work that I was doing, I really wanted to try and think about what role could realist evaluation play within the sport and physical activity world, and how can we try to bring this closer to practitioners, because realist evaluation is something that is very caught up within the academic world, but not so much within the practitioner world. So for me, Katie's alluded to what realist evaluation is. Realist evaluation is about trying to understand how and why and for whom programs work. So, and context is crucial. So it's about not just about explaining what an outcome is, it's about explaining how and why that outcome came about. And there's just a nice quote there, which hopefully you probably would have read, I won't read it out to you, which kind of captures the point that I'm trying to make in terms of how the knowledge that we accrue through evaluation and monitoring can really be synthesized across the different worlds that we live in as academics and practitioners. So next slide. And I think a challenge for stakeholder collaboration quite often, now I'm not saying that the 3 points there capture everyone within the system, but you know, from my experience, we have program deliverers, who are the actual people or the practitioners, the programs delivering the program on the ground. But then you have the funders who are commissioning the work, who are funding the work, and then you have external evaluators who are coming in. They've tendered for the evaluation, they're academics or they're consultancies, and they all come in with different perspectives around, yes, we want to understand the impact of the program, but maybe we have different ideas of what evidence is needed, and that reflects different research paradigms, different research perspectives, what we're trying to legitimize within the work that we do, because a lot of the time we're having to showcase that sport or physical activity can and does have an influence. So there is a big challenge there to try and bring stakeholders together to share the same evaluation approach. So these issues quite often can lead to practitioners, people on the ground, being disconnected. But can such a quandary be solved? That's the question. Next one, Katie, thank you. And this is where through my work and my PhD and through some of the publications that I've written, there is a framework that's just been introduced, which is called the Principles to Guide Collaborative Approaches to Evaluation. And it is in my view that for any evaluation methodology to be mobilized within a participatory environment, we need to have a premise, a foundation for that to happen. And this is where these principles to guide collaborative evaluation come in. They've been pioneered by a guy called Brad Cousins, who's Canadian, so very prominent in the US, but he's probably one of the leading figures in this particular area. And he suggests that we need to consider 8 key principles for collaborative evaluation. I'm not going to go into too much detail in them because I've got limited time, but things such as fostering meaningful professional relationships, clarifying motivation for collaboration from people from the outset, shared understandings of the program under evaluation, promoting appropriate processes or evaluation methodologies within an evaluation, and monitoring evaluation progress, resources are crucial, as well as trying to foster and promote evaluative thinking around people who are actually involved in the delivery of the program, and ultimately to try and enhance use so that what we do in a participatory environment is going to benefit people in the future. So that the CAE framework, collaborative approaches to evaluation, is at the heart of the approach that I've been taking within my work, which is what the next slide will go into in a bit detail. So Generation Gains, just very briefly, was a funded program by Zurich Community Trust that funded 3 professional football club charities across the country. It was a collaboration between myself and the University of Bath in terms of doing the evaluation, and the key questions within the key aims of Generation Gains were around trying to provide physical activity programs to older adults within specific communities who might be at risk of loneliness or isolation. So the idea was to try and use sport or physical activity as a tool to try to address loneliness and isolation. There was another big element there as well, which was training younger practitioners as apprentices to be able to try and address these intergenerational gaps that might be there as well. So, for example, try to bring younger people and older people closer together to start to sort of like break these stereotypes of older and younger people not getting on per se. So my focus was a realist evaluation of the Southampton site, which was a separate piece of work. But then I was also asked to be involved in doing a collaborative evaluation as well, where we could try to enhance the understanding behind the programme by involving the apprentices or the practitioners much more within the evaluation, where instead of me as a traditional academic coming in and doing it, the practitioners did it. We did it together. So it was almost like a form of empowerment evaluation, giving them the opportunity. So if you go to the next slide. So what we did, so the picture to the right-hand side was back in the olden days where we used to be able to get together and not wear masks and have a nice conversation in a meeting and not virtually. And basically what we did, hence we, that isn't me punching Jack, no it's not, Claire. It was a capacity building project, was designed to train the apprentices. So a collaborative evaluation was designed to help them to be more involved in the evaluation, because we weren't saying that they were not involved, because they were very much involved, but we wanted them to have more of an involvement in terms of designing and developing the ideas that they had. So the key thing there was around trying to improve their understanding of evaluation and what it meant, so that they could understand the program more, and then also understand evaluation techniques that could lead into other aspects of their roles as well, which was crucial. So for me, I was quite passionate about understanding how and why things worked, so that realist emphasis. However, I've got there carefully does it, because there are dangers with us as academics coming in with these ideas of a specific evaluation methodology and then expecting people to take it on. So we have to be careful with the different language that we use within it as well. So I was very, very wary of that. We mobilised that across 2 waves of apprentices. So what I'm going to particularly talk about here is the impacts of the second wave, because we did a whole host of different evaluation methodologies. And the one that we particularly went with is the one that I'm going to talk about now, which is with Jack and with Harvey. So if you go to the next slide, Katie. Right, so what did we do? So we mobilised a collaborative realist photo voice evaluation. So how did that happen and how did we do it? So I'm going to talk very briefly through this framework here. Now, first and foremost, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of what photo voice is. I'm sure most people are. Photo voice is a nice participatory way to capture program impacts and outcomes and processes by giving your participants and your beneficiaries the opportunity to capture photography, capture images of the impact of the program. So not just inside the sessions, but outside, like relationships that are happening outside, meeting with people, capturing those environments. So the first thing that we did before we even decided that we were going to go for photo voice is that we did some program theory development and gleaning. And that was basically first step. What did the apprentices, what did the practitioners think of the program? What did the program consist of? What were their insights? And from that led really nicely into the second stage of reviewing existing and developing new approaches. So in terms of that first bit within point 2, what are we evaluating at the moment? What are the methods of evaluation that are there at the minute? In what way could those evaluation approaches be improved so that we can actually have a voice and feed back our views into that? And that's what led to gaps that were there within the evaluation, which is why we decided to develop the photo voice idea. So through photo voice, which is phase 3, and all of these sections, by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, were all supported by workshops that myself and Claire attended, Claire Russell, who's in the audience. And they were premised around the collaborative approaches to evaluation principles, where we were supporting the practitioners, Jack and Harvey, to be able to do this work. And particularly with the photo voice element, through point 3, we were providing them with training. We were working together to actually get this working in the community. I think one of the things that I would have to say, and I take my hat off to Jack and Harvey, is that they did this throughout COVID as well. So when we had lockdown, the program had to stop, but carried on in different formats, they were still able to see it through. And that then led to the next stage, whereby having mobilized the photo voice, given the participants the cameras, they did some focus groups, they did some interviews to try and capture how and why and for whom the program was working, which then led us to the final stages of analysing the data, which is crucial, and then communicating those evaluation findings, which for them was through a video and through a presentation report, which was delivered to the funding body, the Saints Foundation, and then to us as the evaluation team as well. So next slide, Katie. Now this here is just an example, is a snippet from their report that they produced. And the reason why I've tried to get that in there, because it's quite hard for me to try and fit this into 20 minutes, because I'm reflecting on how we trained them to work in a participatory environment, but also we're talking about what they did as well. So this was some of the findings that they came out with in regards to the photo voice. And I'm not going to go into too much detail of these here, but what I was really impressed to see was the way that they could capture the qualitative data, but they could also talk about what the outcomes were. And then in terms of a realist sense, for me, they could also talk about because, which is the blue writing in the boxes to the right hand side, in terms of discussing. They were able to say how generation gains was working and why, and not just talking about did it work or not, which I think was quite powerful. Next slide, Katie. So what we wanted to do, particularly from my perspective, within the spirit of collaborative evaluation, we wanted to try and understand the apprentice impact in terms of how it was working for them in terms of their continual professional development. Was it transformational for them in terms of their evaluative thinking? Did they think any differently about evaluation? Because in my experience, some practitioners feel that monitoring and evaluation is a little bit of a tick box exercise, or it could be something that is very time consuming. So we wanted to try and understand how did they receive it, essentially. So this is where the next findings come in, which is the next slide. And these were some of the key outcomes and impacts that came about. So this is just, again, a snapshot of what came out of this process. So there was some clear gains there in terms of intergenerational gains, where some of the apprentices across wave 1 and wave 2, I'm referring to wave 1 and 2 data now here, the evaluation gave me more of a reason to engage with the participants. I really enjoyed getting to know the participants more and learning about them, as well as things we have in common. So quite clearly the evaluation enabled them to engage more within a relationship building exercise with the participants, which I think was quite powerful. In terms of ownership, there was this belief in what they were doing. You know, I believed in what we were doing because it was our evaluation. So they actually felt part of it, rather than feeling like, oh, we're just an add-on here. The University of Bath and Solent are leading on this. We're not really part of it. So I think that was quite powerful in terms of feeling like they owned part of that process. And in terms of evaluation, thinking and learning, one of the apprentices said it was really beneficial to help me understand what we were doing in the program. So a big part of realist evaluation is actually developing program theory. What are we actually aiming to do within the program before we then seek to evaluate it, which I think is really important as well. So that kind of came out, and it was really pleasing from my perspective, and also from the evaluation teams, to see that in terms of continual professional development, some of these apprentices were able to go on and secure full-time jobs and reflect on these experiences. So those are just some of the snapshots. If we go to the next slide. And this is just a stakeholder insight. So this is a quote from one of the senior members of staff within the Saints Foundation who are managing the apprentices, Jack and Harvey. And you can see here from this quote how well it was received, and how well they could see this type of work building into, you know, the future work of the foundation, and how evaluation is mobilized. So some good findings there. Next slide, Katie. So given that I'm coming close to my 20 minutes, and Katie's, I can feel her saying, Kev, 20 minutes. these are some of the overall summary and key lessons that I would like to kind of capture through the short period of time that I've had to talk about this. So first and foremost, it is quite clear that practitioners of any age and rank have the capacity to carry out evaluation work. So respect is crucial. Relationships are crucial in terms of, in this case, apprentices use the capacity building experience to engage with adults. So in terms of getting practitioners more involved in participatory evaluation is an excellent tool to engage better with your participants, which within sport and physical activity, sport for development is fundamental. In terms of learning, you know, it's quite clear that the apprentices understood evaluation much more, that they appreciated what it was and they were able to really see the importance of it. And we know how important that is within our fields because we're constantly asked to evaluate what we're doing. So learning and this idea of being better evaluators, learning about the program is crucial. And this was a really nice way to try and bring academics and practitioners closer together to be able to bring those two areas of knowledge and expertise closer. Next slide, Katie. So in terms of recommendations and relevance here, these are some of the recommendations that I would kind of suggest and that we've suggested as a result of doing this project. And I've tried to align these to the CAE principles that I talked about at the start. So establish motivation for collaboration from the outset. You know, find out exactly what do people want to get out of the evaluation? What do they want to get out of the project? And by doing that, you can then start to align how you come in, maybe as an academic or as someone else as a consultant, to try to synthesize that and be in this space of mutual consensus. So motivation, collaboration, for me, is one of the first starting points. Having a good relationship and achievable practices is absolutely fundamental. We need to try and move beyond power imbalances of the academic who's perceived as this expert, which I completely disagree with, versus practitioner. We need to move beyond that. We need to start working more together so that we can have some meaningful relationships. And again, collaborative evaluation can do it. Trust the innovation and evaluative thinking that the practitioners have. If we hadn't have come up with this project, photo voice wouldn't have existed. We wouldn't have had it. So I think giving the practitioners the opportunity to be part of shaping the voice and shaping the way that the evaluation goes in partnership with academic institutions who are doing these evaluations is fundamental. And we wouldn't have had this otherwise, and we wouldn't have had the benefits that came about. And I suppose my final advice, because I'm at 21 minutes coming into 22, is help practitioners and work with organisations to try and bring academics and practitioners closer together to actually mobilise monitoring and evaluation training and procedures and facilitation so that we can work together, because we're all talking about the same things here, and providing that CPD support is crucial. So if you just go to the last slide, Katie, next one. This isn't a case of a shameless promotion, but that there are a couple of the people in the audience. Andrew Bailey, I believe, is in the audience, and Chad's in the audience as well. If you're interested to read more about some of this stuff, which is impossible to talk about completely within 22 minutes, then these papers here, I can share those with you if you like, and Brad Cousins' book, which I've also part of that book, the only UK example, then please let me know. But whew, thank you. Hope that makes sense. Thanks, Katie.
So yeah, I'd just like to say thanks, Kev, and I'm sure everyone will forgive you for running a couple of minutes over to be able to give us that sort of whistle-stop tour through your work. But I think really sort of bringing out there the just the real value of spending that time with the apprentices to build their capacity to undertake this work, and then the benefits that arose from that. Now, there were a few questions that came up through the session, and because I was sharing my screen, actually I wasn't able to see them, so I'm just going to quickly go over that. But I have noticed that there's a question coming up around perhaps traditionally we might see evaluation as quite a scary thing, and people feel afraid of the evaluator. And just wondered if you can say anything about that in terms of the potential benefits or the positive aspects of participatory or collaborative evaluation for addressing potential fear from practitioners of being evaluated.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's it's a big danger, and I'm not saying that having objective evaluators coming in from academic institutions or from consultancies being commissioned to do this work isn't the way forward, because I understand that there is a need for it. But I think there are dangers of that, because immediately that strikes up this assumption that, okay, these guys are going to come in, they're going to do the evaluation, they're going to take care of it. So therefore there's dangers there in terms of how well that learning is taken on. They might feel, oh, we're being judged. They're coming in with these methodologies, and realist evaluation, for example, could be one of them, with all of its terminology and technical acronyms that can be quite disempowering. So we need to try to get to a point, which is where I think collaborative and participatory evaluation comes in, where people within academia, with the research or the evaluation, expertise, if you want to call it that, can come in, but the practitioners who work on the ground and the people, the deliverers know so much more than the practitioners. That's where it's really important. And there are some people out there who would say that practitioners doing the evaluation is biased, but that's where I think Brad Cousins and Schuller's CAE principles really come in, because they enable you to really balance that and monitor resource dependency, and enables you to be able to try and encourage practitioners to think objectively and step back in a reflexive way to what's being done. So, it's my main passion, really. It's something that as a practitioner I used to be, and kind of I still am now, I suppose, because through my community innovation program at Solent, we mobilize around 20 projects a year. And in the last 6 years, we've reached out to around 4,000 beneficiaries in the city. So, I'm not sure if that answers the question, Katie, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think it does, and it's also reflected. Anna and Chris in the chat have also kind of highlighted this potentially alongside these techniques is to move the discourse around evaluations from being around sort of tyranny of proof into something which is much more about critical reflection, learning, and essentially sharing that knowledge between the academic and that practitioner.
And I think there is kind of like this fear of when it's a natural thing of this over legitimacy. Sometimes we're trying to overly legitimize the worth of what we are doing, and sometimes practitioners and even academics are kind of encouraged to tell us that this program is doing everything that it should be doing. And again, a collaborative mutual discussion across. So here, Zurich, I haven't mentioned them a lot, but Zurich, I think, I'm sure Claire will agree with me, were phenomenal because they were very open to learning. They didn't want to just be told, yeah, the program's reducing loneliness, it's reducing isolation, and it's perfect in terms of trying to bring this intergenerational link together. They were obviously passionate about that, but they were very keen through this capacity building stuff to be told otherwise. So there was that mutual discussion and dialogue taking place throughout, which was really, really important.
I like Claire's comment here that Zurich wouldn't have funded Saints unless they brought you in, Kevin. So I think that's just a real testament to your skills and ability there. Nice. We've got a comment from Kim, and also a question that Ian wanted to raise directly. But if it's okay with you both, Kim and Ian, I'm going to hand over to Cara to present now. And what we'll do is we'll pick up those questions in the section after Cara's spoken, and just give Kevin a chance to read that comment from Kim as well. So Cara, if you're able to share your screen and go with your presentation, that would be fantastic.
Will do. Thank you, Katie. Just bear with me. Great. Can everyone see that? Yeah, got a nod. Fantastic. Hi everyone, thanks Kev as well. It was really interesting to hear your experiences there. I hope this presentation complements that from a slightly different perspective. I do have risk of going over time, so feel free to flap your arms at me, Casey, if I am. So I'm Cara Danks. I'm a research fellow with Sheffield Hallam University, also an embedded researcher with You've Got This, which is one of the 12 Sport England local delivery pilots. So on the slide there, I've also mentioned the core team at You've Got This. Mal, who's sadly moved on now to a new role, actually as Executive Director of Tees Valley Sport, the active partnership in the area. Lauren Perkin, James Hartley, Jen Berger and Olivia Luke, all integrated and fundamental to the evaluation, of course. And then the wider evaluation team, which is Katie Shearn, who you've met today. Professor David Broom, who's now at Coventry University, and Dr. Sonia Dolkin, who's at Northumbria University. So what I would like to cover today is a very brief bit about my background and what I think that brings to my approach to the evaluation. A brief introduction to You've Got This. Look at the process, the realist process evaluation approach that we're taking. Have a think about what this looks like day to day. Think about some key takeaways and then direction of travel with this work. So in terms of my background, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I've got experience from across different disciplines and sectors. On the right hand side there, I've pulled out some things that I think are relevant to the way I do things with the team and with the evaluation. So in terms of previous practitioner experience, that was as a midwife and probation officer, again, totally different roles from each other. But for both of those, critical reflection was essential. And I believe that's really important as part of any sort of learning approach. Experience of behaviour change techniques. In terms of academic experience, a PhD also used a realist approach informed by complexity mindset. So I'd say I'd bring that as well. In terms of employment, I just wanted to mention that I was previously a knowledge exchange broker for the NIHR School for Public Health Research. And the reason for going into that role and taking it forward as well in terms of knowledge exchange is seeking to bridge that practice academia gap, which Kev's been talking about as well. So that's a real interest of mine. So You've Got This. So the vision for You've Got This is active lives as a way of life. I'll come on a little bit more to the vision when I go through one of the examples later. So the pilot has an exchange of ambassadors, and this is across a wide range of people across the system. So it includes public health, housing, planning and culture, travel, voluntary in the charity sector, local councillors, police, active sports partnership, and many more. The focus of the pilot is 4 wards across Redcar and Cleveland and Middlesbrough. And then they've got 4 communities of interest. So prehabilitation looks at physical activity to support people pre-surgery, health professionals with a focus on GP surgeries, Slimming World to try and bring a physical activity element into that work, and type 2 diabetes in terms of physical activity, managing that long-term condition. Some of the team, I should have said, are also on the call today, so if you feel I haven't done it justice, then feel free to comment in the chat or later on. So moving on, a little bit about the process evaluation approach that we're taking. So the embedded researcher role, and I see this is integral to the approach that we're taking. I'm bound to say that because I'm in the role, but the embedded researcher role really helps to get involved with the context and understand what's going on at that level. This map illustration on the side here is an embedded researcher framework that has been developed by a project through the NIHR. I've got the website on my references as part of the slide, and that looked at different areas that embedded researcher roles cover. For example, power dynamics, the relational aspect of the role, and others. So that's a framework that can help support people who are interested in embedded researcher roles. In terms of the realist aspect, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the theory today, but essentially that's looking at what works for whom, in what circumstances, why and how. It's informed by systems thinking, and Katie mentioned and gave some examples and definitions of that earlier. And importantly, the evaluation focuses on stakeholders and high-level system change. So if you feel I haven't mentioned communities, it's because the stakeholder aspect, the professional aspect is my focus. So what it looks like. So just to pick up really, this might cover a little bit of the conversation that's been going on in the comments around trying to, I guess, reduce that fear of evaluation. I think it's really natural if you have an evaluator coming in to evaluate you as a human being. That can be terrifying process sometimes, I guess, and just you know, getting used to that role. So at the beginning we did some work with the team, just discussing expectations, and I think some of the difficulty as well when it's a whole systems approach that's new and emerging is really working out where people's roles sit and working that out together. So we developed a terms of reference evaluation reminder sheet, called it, which just broke down what the evaluation is, how we're doing it and what it isn't. So this was a tool that we've developed with and used with the core team, also with the wider program management office to support the understanding around the evaluation approach, and also with stakeholders that I've interviewed or done focus groups with as part of the process. So the key things about it are that it's co-produced, doing it with and not to, involves collective sense making and very much a learning approach. How, I've covered a little bit around the realist methodology and systems thinking, focus on stakeholders, a little bit about developing program theory and what that involves, observations, reflection, planning, revising, gathering evidence from lots of different places, which is supported by the my embedded researcher role. And importantly as well, I think helping create that space for the team to reflect and stay true to the ideas and principles and goals of the programme. And then what it isn't, surveillance, spying or catching you out, monitoring, performance management or reporting back on you, or individual or personal or psychoanalysis. And that might sound a little bit obvious, but I think it's important to point these things out, especially when you're working in a group with people, just to make it really clear what it is and what it isn't. And I think particularly as an embedded researcher, when you turn up and you're a new person and you're sitting there in meetings and observing and making notes, that can be a little bit daunting at first until you've got those relationships and trust established. So moving on with the realist process evaluation approach. So this is our common purpose model. The model was co-produced with the process evaluation team and the core team in the programme. So I guess from a realist perspective, this is an overarching programme theory that we can use to zoom in and test different areas, how we think things might be working, and develop micro programme theories. More practically, I would describe it as a way of the team helping them to understand what they're doing. And this is the way they're trying to work essentially with stakeholders. And it provides a framework for learning and developing those programme theories within the team as well. So just to talk through it briefly, I know there's a lot of information on the slides there. The grey areas in the arrows at the top are the areas of practice that the team identified were important in supporting stakeholders to work towards active lives as a way of life, which is the vision for the programme. And then the common purpose yellow element in the middle assumes that subscribing to a vision, having value in that vision, whether personal or professional level, and meeting some objectives in that way. And then that will lead to common functions, so working together collectively, which is taking some sort of action that leads to a goal or the vision of active lives as a way of life. The bottom section covers infrastructure level and organisational level. In realist words, that would be context. So everything else going on that we need to be aware of in the system. But that covers things like, so an example of national context at the moment would be COVID, and obviously that's impacted everyone, including this evaluation, and everybody's work and the way we work, the way the communities are working with people in those communities. At a local level, that's also impacting us in different ways because of the differences across different local authorities in terms of restrictions. So that would be an up-to-date example of that. So going to move on a little bit. In terms of what goes on behind that model and the approach that's been taken with the evaluation, this is another model we developed with the team. This was informed by several different experiential learning cycles that I've got referenced in the reference list, including Gibb and Kolb, and also some work done by Jill Westhorpe around realist action research. So essentially this supports the team to understand the process that we go through when we're developing program theories and how that fits into practice. So what I'm going to do now is move on to some slides that go through each step in the process and try to bring it to life with an example that'll be really familiar to the team. So the first stage is developing ideas or the way we think things are working. So that's like the basic stage of program theory development. So an example, and I've taken a little snip of the common purpose model at the bottom there, is so when we first started working with the team, an assumption was that if a stakeholder was bought into the vision or had value in the vision, that is why they would turn up to meetings, for example. So people attend the exchange because they believe in the vision. And then moving forward to the testing that out. So the testing out stage is thinking about the hows and whys from a realist perspective, thinking about whether that rings true in practice. It could involve collecting insight or data in the forms of observations, interviews, or workshops, and so on. So what the team did was, at one of the exchange meetings, they asked the exchange partners, ambassadors, how do you feel about the vision? The answer they got from the partnership or the exchange wasn't necessarily what they expected. So it didn't support their ideas around everyone being necessarily bought into the vision, and that's the reason why they turned up. So reflecting on this, the team had to think about why this might be, what's going on here, why is this? And some of the things that I've written on the bottom of the slide there came from the ambassadors. They felt there was a lack of clarity, active was not necessarily the right word, needs refining. And there's questions about whether we were all on the same page and is there ownership yet? So there's a real sense of what we're there for and what do we belong to. I should have said that the vision, active lives as a way of life, used to be more people, more active, more often. So that's the vision that the exchange are commenting on, not the one that we have now. So taken forward into the next stage of the learning cycle, the planning stage considers the previous stages and thinks about how this might lead to an adaptation in practice and a refinement of the program theory, so why we think things are happening, supported by other theories. And those two things are inextricably linked, so you can't really separate them from each other. So that's why it's so important to work together in this way and co-create this knowledge. So in terms of practice, the core team considered ways of making the partnership more interactive, considered a change of language and what the language meant and how that fit with the values of the pilot and the whole systems approach. And from a program theory perspective, we started thinking around ideas of ownership and self-efficacy. I'm not going to go into full details of the program theory today, but just that's to give you an idea of the development of the program theory. And then in terms of adaptation, so adaptations making changes to practice. So because we're a process evaluation, things happen as we go along, it's concurrent, and that might be at a delivery or strategic level. So linking back to our example around changing the vision with the exchange, the action that the core team took based on their reflections on their experience of putting the vision back to the exchange was that they rebranded and had a change of language. So the exchange used to be called the Programme Delivery Partnership. It's now called the exchange to symbolise that two-way process. The delivery approach from the core team has changed over time from doing to developing with. So it was more of a reporting back process, and it's now very much bringing in the values of co-production with their members of their exchange. It took a leaning into the resistance and becoming interested in why, rather than panicking that the members of the exchange didn't like the vision, and seeing it, really reframing it as an opportunity that the members of the exchange were engaging and wanted to be part of this. And it was perhaps more about ownership and the how of things that we're doing. And a new vision was co-created with ambassadors. So the Active Lives as a Way of Life is a co-created vision that was done at an interactive session with ambassadors. A set of new potential visions were created by the Creative Alchemist, which is a branding and marketing company you've got this work with. And then everyone voted on it. So the one we've got now is the one everyone's created. So in terms of learning, the learning arm of the spiral goes right back up to the top, really reminds us that what we're doing here is trying to accumulate evidence. We're building on evidence by developing programme theories and feeding that back into both practice and new programme theories, refining how we think things are working. So some early examples of insight that's come out of this is the importance of creating a feedback loop. So always asking for feedback and showing this is valued by adapting delivery or strategy where appropriate and feeding this back to ambassadors. Providing resources to help ambassadors to champion, champion You've Got This through engaging with others. They're currently developing an ambassador pack for that process. And that co-creation of a vision or process or strategy can support ownership and lead to increased buy-in. So in terms of what this looks like day to day, I'm running out of time, so I'll try and cover this briefly. But really, this entire evaluation approach is completely reliant on relationships. You know, it's the team have really invested in getting on board with it. They're very open to honest conversations and have really, I think, developed value in the learning approach and can see how that has helped them improve practice going forward. They might say differently. Feel free to comment in the box if you do. So that's been relationship building over time. What that has looked like on a practical level is embedding processes such as weekly process learning meetings with the team, supporting that reflective approach, critical reflection, thinking in that evaluative way, and facilitating those honest conversations. And also, I guess, the critical reflection element from the other side. So me critically reflecting with the process evaluation team as well as we go forward. And shifting the other things is, I guess, similar to the things Kev was saying as well, shifting that power balance in the academic and practice relationship. We're working it out together. So some key takeaways very quickly. This is a real different way of working. So it's a paradigm shift in the relationship between evaluation and practice. It recognises that changes to physical activity require more than individual level change. Critical reflection and flexibility are crucial from everyone involved, in academics and practitioners. And it requires getting out of your comfort zone as well. Some of this work is a bit uncomfortable. It requires really honest and open conversations to shift mindsets and ways of working in terms of the culture as well. And just briefly, before I finish, my contact details are on the bottom there if you're interested in picking anything up that I've been talking about. And just to say, actually, Mal, I haven't told you this, so good news that the publication of the Common Purpose Model paper has just been accepted this week. So that'll be coming soon in the Royal Society of Public Health Perspective and Public Health Special Edition around physical activity. So that's great. It's a short paper and it'll just sort of explain the common purpose model in a bit more detail. I'm presenting at the International Realist Conference in February. It was due to be this year, but it's been pushed forward and is now online. So at that conference, I'll be talking in more theoretical detail about the programme theories. And then a project that I've got some small amount of seed corn funding for through SHU is looking at that gap between practice and academia and trying to develop some ways of working. If anyone is interested in that, do feel free to drop me a line. And that's it, Katie. It's just my references on the end there, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cara. Is my echo there, or is that okay? It's okay. Okay. So it's really interesting to hear about your experiences, and obviously I've sort of been along with the journey with you as well, and just a nice comment that's coming from Lauren there saying that this approach has helped to help them understand the programme and the work that they're doing, but also to help with her development too. And I think that chimes with what the feedback that we had from Claire and Kevin earlier around building that evaluative capacity is not just to evaluate the programme that you're working on, but also for professional development and to support a different way of thinking and looking at this challenge of physical activity and supporting people to be more active. We've got a couple of questions. One question came in from Kim, which was different from the question that I think that she asked Kevin earlier. So we'll start with that one. I don't know, Kim, if you want to unmute and ask the question now, because we've got a little bit more time just to sort of have a bit more of discussion.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Katie, and thank you so much for your presentations. I very much enjoyed them, and it very much reflects the world that I work in as well, hence my questions. The latter one to do with Cara, though, was really around what I'm also an embedded researcher and spend a lot of time getting shared purpose and shared values. And of course, the key challenge is then once you have them all, which takes a lot of investment time, the reality is about how you achieve it in reality. And often that is due to the sort of thinking patterns and ways of behaving, particularly across organisations that reflect the work of Fleck. I don't know whether you're familiar with them, who argues that it's, you know, how we manage learning, how we manage conflict, how we manage relationships. Those are the things that stop us sort of living our values. So I was interested in your experience of managing that once you've got past the first stage of having the shared values which you've collectively developed.
Yeah, I think we're really lucky because the pilot itself and Sport England really are invested in this sort of approach. You know, taking new ways or really instilling that value in terms of the evaluation because of the whole systems approach is really accepted by them across the board. I mean, you've still got I think part of it is accepting that people's ways of working and behaviours and patterns of working are sometimes their default ways. So it's repeating the messages, finding ways to really instill that, I guess, and try and get people on board in terms of valuing it, and repeating the messages a lot of the time, not necessarily with the core team who I work with closely, but I guess from the wider group. But the team will find that in terms of their messages out to others for trying to get the vision of active life as a way of life out there. I think it's a similar sort of process. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Kim.
Yeah, no, even some insight, thank you. I mean, for me, I would use the processes of high challenge and high support to give feedback constantly to each other about whether we're living the values and the purpose that we've collectively agreed. So that's a very simple little technique that sometimes is helpful, and I'm sure you've got others as well.
That's great, Kim, thank you. I'm just going to address the question that's come up in the chat from Julian. And you know, it's a good question. I was hoping to introduce the session to explain how this title came about. But the question that Julian asks is participatory. The title of the session is Participatory Evaluation of Social Change Through Physical Activity. We've heard of approaches to participatory evaluation, but, and I understand the point you're making is that how does physical activity create social change rather than personal change? And what I was trying to address in the first introductory session is saying that actually social change comes about through a collective effort across a range of different bodies, sectors. What in fact, if you take the World Health Organization's approach, the whole of government, whole of society. So it's everybody. And our work that we focus on today is around how participatory evaluation can support practitioners and stakeholders and social innovators to do this work to encourage physical activity, and then that work also looks at the outcomes of physical activity beyond just the sort of being active, but the social connectedness and the sort of reciprocity between becoming more active and the social change that may bring about. But it does recognise that's a long and complicated journey, and so we're trying to introduce the idea that participatory evaluation has both the impact of being able to support a better understanding of the world by incorporating knowledge from different spheres, but also in doing the participatory evaluation it has an impact on distributing power and social change. And as Cara alluded to, these two presentations haven't covered the kind of, probably the most important group of people in all of this, and that is actually, just people who are living in the world who are inactive. And that's not to say that we don't do physical activity evaluations with community participants. It's just that we haven't focused on those today. So I hope that is that somewhat goes to answer your question. I don't know, Cara or Kevin, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was Katie, I was just going to come in on that, and good, thanks, Julian. Julian's from Surge, one of our Surge team. Just to, I agree with everything that Katie has said. I think one of the challenges with reflecting on participatory evaluation is that you have very limited time to be able to talk about, because there's almost like there's two things going on. You've got the reflection on how you've worked with the practitioners or with the stakeholders to be able to actually mobilize the evaluation, to be able to understand, did the program work or did it not work, and why and how did it work? But then within my presentation, for example, I'd love to have spoken in more depth about what Harvey and Jack found or uncovered through their, what I call kind of an implicit realist evaluation, because they weren't using things like context mechanisms and outcomes. We weren't using, all of the switch off terms that switches people off, demi-regularities, program theories and stuff like that, which can turn some people off, not everyone, but some. And so for them, they were able to explain how the physical activity program resources that were provided within Generation Gains created social change for those participants. But the point I'm trying to make is it's very hard to be able to talk about all of that at the same time. It's also almost if we need to have another webinar where the actual practitioners come in, or we talk specifically about what did we find out about the social change that came about through the physical activity, if that makes sense. So
yeah. Actually, yeah. I'd just like to invite Ian to unmute if you wouldn't mind, Ian. I know you had a question earlier for Kev, and you've also made a comment, I guess, back to Julian. So do you have any views on this?
I think my question maybe is wrapped up with some of these kind of other discussions, and it's maybe more a reflection, but I wonder how much, broad level, I'm not going to say systems change, but how much structural change is required to make these kind of approaches viable. I think I was taken when you were kind of speaking, Kevin, and maybe a theme across it was about kind of shared motivations, and we spoke very much at the kind of individual levels of kind of relationships and those kind of things, I think. And I think what I heard from you, Kev, and maybe Cara, was a bit about academics moving towards practitioners. But equally, I think if we look at the structures within which academics sit, there's precious within our institutions stopping us doing that, as well as facilitating it. And I just wonder, how much does that broader structural change have to happen to allow this kind of work to happen more often and better?
Yeah, I'd just like to invite Mal. I think Mal had a view on this. So Mal is the outgoing program director for You've Got This, and then we can pick up on the academic perspective as well.
Yeah, you've only got about a period of 2 weeks where you can keep calling me the outgoing Kating, by the way. It's got a real shelf life. And hello again, Ian, long time no see. Just in answer a little bit to Graham's question and to Ian's question, in terms of some of this issue about social change and emergence, I think certainly what we've seen working, all the great buzzwords, complexity and whole system change, is that it doesn't require to change the whole system, and quite often we're working with nested systems within systems. An example I would give you is that in terms of kind of social movement theory and the 4 stages of social movement theory, we've certainly found that applying the common purpose model has a far more kind of practical application locally in terms of system change. And clearly what we're trying to do, and what the emergence from some of the diffusion we're trying to get in the system is that you tend to change hearts and minds one at a time. An example I would give with that, when we first established the pilot, we established a really broad cross-sector partnership, and we deliberately went after the unusual partners who traditionally wouldn't have any contribution to physical activity. So housing associations and GPs, although that may be a controversial comment. So, we went after organisations who really didn't see their contribution to the agenda, but through kind of constant engagement and sharing their insight, getting them to understand that it was the way in which they work, not the work they do, that was important. Some of them have started to understand their contribution to the physical activity agenda. So, for example, a housing association that came to numerous meetings and that genuinely kind of went, we're not sure why we're here, but we'll keep coming anyway, to getting to a place eventually where they went, oh, actually, we're investing £10 million in a local community through remodeling and restructuring the physical space, but we haven't actually thought about, are we creating an active space? So would you mind having a look at this for us and just casting your eye and giving us some feedback? Now, that for us, that was probably one of the most single biggest kind of moves forward that we've had, because in terms of tackling an activity, sport and physical activity sector have like this much to contribute, whereas the wider system and the cross sector have a huge amount of contribution. So the whole system change isn't about changing the whole system at a time, it's almost one heart and mind at a time. And collectively, the emergence that comes through that is that shared value and appreciation of physical activity. If that's understandable.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Mal, for that. And I just reflect on the sort of academic perspective on participatory evaluation, participatory approaches, embedded researcher, and I do think it's an emergent field in academic terms. Obviously, I know it's not new, but in terms of people appreciating it and seeing value in it, I think that's still emerging. And I was just reflecting. I was on a webinar from the launch of the World Health Organization physical activity guidelines last night, so I was just attending as an attendee, and so much of the data that supports those the hard guidelines comes from your sort of traditional randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews type activities, which is sort of quite the other end of the spectrum from the kind of research and evaluation that we're talking about here. But I was gratified by the questions that came into that webinar, which were all about, well, that's all well and good saying that people need to exercise for 150 minutes or more, but how do we actually implement this? How do we actually get the situation where there's equality? And so I think there's an open door to be able to start to suggest new approaches and try to have them valued, and perhaps that's something that the group here we can collectively work towards. Kev, do you have any other thoughts on Ian's point or Ian's questions?
Yeah, and again, just following on from what you said, Katie, which I really agree with. I think from an academic perspective, that obviously every academic institution is different, but they all have their own layers of red tape and barriers that kind of are set. So it makes things like participatory evaluation quite challenging. Because, for example, in my case and in my experience of mobilising this within the Generation Gains, the programme practitioners within Generation Gains became part of the evaluation, so therefore they became part of that kind of research process. That makes sense, because evaluation is a form of, it is different to research, but it is a form of, it requires research methodology, for example. So that was a challenge to consider. And then obviously even participatory evaluation can go even as far as the beneficiaries or the people in the program participating. So for example, in our case, we were giving participants cameras, and giving them the opportunities to capture, and in a way they were collecting data as well. So the reason why I say all this is because it's something that some academic institutions in terms of those broader structures don't always recognise, but it's so powerful and it's such a crucial way for us to be able to unlock and understand what is really going on within these programs in terms of any social change or what at all is actually taking shape. And in our case, the evaluation fell under the University of Bath. So Bath, and Claire, who's a part of the audience, was very sensitive and was really helpful in terms of ensuring that Bath recognised that. So yeah, but that's only the other bit I would say to that.
Okay. I'd just like to return to the question. It was a really nice question that came up a bit earlier, Kev, with regards to your presentation, but I think it relates to everything that we're discussing here. Is that the question was, what advice would you give new researchers who want to be collaborative, inclusive, and work with participatory approaches? So I think we might cover that, but I'd also probably throw into the mix, again, my experience of working closely with practitioners and stakeholders is what advice, or how do we build capacity for people who pride themselves on being doers to actually build capacity to also be able to critically reflect. So I know there are two different questions, and if anybody would like to come in to to reflect on that or answer that, then please just raise a hand and I'll come to you next. But Kev, what would you say to either of those, advice you'd give to new researchers and or how to support practitioners to critically reflect?
Yeah, I think, thanks for that. And I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to try and bridge the gap in terms of the perception of what an academic does and then what a practitioner does, for example, because some academics are perceived as these people who live in these ivory towers, who are casting judgment, are doing research on people rather than with people. And I think just being a human being, being able to talk to people in their own language, on their own terms, in their own ways, is so important. That's part of the problem why politicians find it so hard to engage with people, is because they talk in a different language and they just don't have a common conversation. So for me, in my experience of doing this stuff, being able to have a chat, have a bit of banter, because these were young apprentices, Claire will probably agree with me on this, having a nice conversation and being, okay, we're coming from the same perspective here. There was that kind of mutual understanding and respect that was there. And I think I didn't really have a lot of a chance to go through it and talk about it within my presentation, but that first stage of program theory development that we did with the apprentices was crucial, because it was a realization moment for them where there's bits about this program that we're not so aware of, but actually now we are. So it was kind of like, switching on that consciousness. And then I said, okay, well, what about these things that you're being asked to do at the moment? So they were being asked to go out with this screening tool with all of these participants to measure isolation and loneliness. And it was something like 6 pages long. And they felt, before this capacity building process, they felt, I don't know, maybe a bit scared, or maybe felt that I have to do it, so I'm just going to do it. But because we gave them that environment to, I don't know, challenge it or just talk about it, that then became a mutual discussion where us and Bath and the funder agreed that we would turn that 6 sides of paper, which a practitioner must be really hard to be able to do in practice, into 2 sides, or maybe even less in the end. So in the end, giving everyone the opportunity to put forward their ideas and what they want to do, that then creates some motivation and some, I'm careful with how I use the word empowerment, but some motivation and intent to actually own something and then take it on, which is what, you know, it wasn't easy, but it certainly, you know, carried out some positive outcomes in the end. So Claire's just said, once the apprentices owned the screening tool, everyone engaged too. So, and that was something that was a big part of the wider evaluation that the University of Bath were doing as well. So in the end, the capacity building really supported the overall evaluation process.
Yeah, I have similar experiences of working with actually groups of young people, so school-age children, to co-create research tools, and then they undertake the research with their peers. And the intention of that originally was to just get some more data. From my perspective, it was a way of just sort of snowballing our ability to reach more young people. But what it actually what happened was that the young people then took on a sort of civic responsibility for that data, and like really to understand what that meant, and then to feel that they then could contribute to the co-design exercise that we were participating in with a much more with much more of a sort of rationale that they were representing the views of their their peers. So I do think that there's something in that, Kev, that you've mentioned there about co-creating tools and giving some ownership of how things are collected or data is collected, as well as what is collected, and making sense of it. Cara, did you have any reflections or anything that you'd like to include?
On the, I guess on the critical reflection element, I can see Anna's just put a comment in there about bridging that gap, and reflection sometimes viewed as unnecessarily or self-indulgent, and can be a challenge to get people on board with that. And yes, it definitely can. And I think also that sometimes an expectation that you as the evaluator will do that critical reflection for them. Not necessarily the core team here, but I think it's that sort of understanding, if you don't really know what critical reflection is or why it's important, then why would you do it? You've been getting on with your practice, you've been doing things, why would you do what someone's been asking? Why would you have a think about that in a way that isn't familiar to you? So I think as part of the process that we've been using, I guess it's building the value in that over time, but that's only through relationships, and I guess showing that it is important, because it ends up with you improving practice or thinking about things in a different way. So I think it's seeing the benefit of it then leads to building that value in it.
Yeah, Anna, does that cover the points there? I know you. Great. Yeah, and I mean, this is perhaps quite a bit flippant of me, but I'm becoming well known in the teams where I'm working of just essentially just asking the question why a lot, and not necessarily taking the first. I see Lauren's just like to not necessarily taking the first answer, and I think that just building that evaluative capacity and sort of, you know, almost challenging the first level of assumption and then the next level of assumption down, to really start to help people to think about what's happening and why something might have worked or not worked, or if you have an intuitive sense of where you should be going or what you should be doing as a practitioner, to just stop and check that sense, you know, and that's helpful for the evaluator too, because you know, particularly in whole systems change, where we know that the long-term impact is potentially quite a way off. You know, we want to know why you're taking certain steps to try to change certain aspects of that structural, cultural context or setting in which you're situated, and what might we see as an indication that those changes are happening. If we're not going to see those kind of changes in physical activity at the you know, within a few months of the work that you're doing, it doesn't mean to say that what you're doing is wrong, but we do need to start thinking about what is the line of sight towards supporting more people to be active. And so that's why the questioning comes in handy, because it helps people to sort of outline their assumptions, and that again helps the evaluation team to design the right data collection tools to support, you know, every opportunity to capture impact in all its various guises within this work. Right, so we're 3 minutes off the time now, and you know, I just want to say thank you very, very much to everybody for coming, and thank you to Kevin and Cara for giving your presentations and outlining, you know, the ups and downs of participatory evaluation. You know, I'm really grateful to people for sticking around for this discussion and for your contributions. So everyone that also was able to unmute and to just say a few words as well. What we'll do at the end of this session is we will be sending a link to the presentation. I know that a few people were registered and were unable to make it in the end, and so we'll send that out to everybody that registered, and you know, do feel free to send that link on to others. But I think some of the questions that have come up in the chat are incredibly thoughtful, and it does stimulate more thinking about and responding to that. So I think what we'll try to do is pull together some sort of summary, and if people are willing, we'll share that as well as an invitation to keep this conversation going. So hopefully within the Eventbrite invitation, you've all got my email address, and if there's anything specific that you want to come back on, do feel free to email me directly, but you will hear from us in the not too distant future with a bit of a summary and perhaps an invitation to continue. So I'd just like to say once again, thanks to everyone for coming along, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.